Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm JC Montoya Price. I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Issue Campaigns at the Alliance for Early Success. And I'm really excited to see you all to talk about how funders are investing in Grassroots to change childcare. Before I get too far, I'd like to have my panelists introduce themselves about who you are, your organization, and what your role is in the policy and advocacy space.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name's Rachel Schumacher, and I am the project director for the Raising Child Care Fund, which is a project of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, which includes 50-plus funders, national and regional, around the country who are committed to early childhood. And we pool funds of now 14 different funders from around the country and direct them to grassroots organizers working on childcare around the country to lift voices, build power, and expand equity in childcare.
It's lovely. Good morning. I'm Ashley Shelton. I'm the president and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, and we are a civic engagement table for the state of Louisiana. But we also work with and focus our work on anchoring our table with base building groups, and then groups with deep content expertise in a number of issues, but early childcare being one of them. I have the wonderful pleasure of partnering with Libby Saunier. And you know, one of the things that I love about the work that we do is that it is both about connecting people back to their agency as both citizens and voters, and also to the ability to understand their power to change the things in their communities.
And I'm Libby Saunier. I'm the executive director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, squarely focused on young children in our state, birth to 4. And we really seek to be a source of data and research related to young children, primarily really centering around early care and education. And we know the name of the game is relationships, and how we really change the trajectory in our state is by partnering and having deep relationships like with the Power Coalition to move the needle in our state.
Awesome. We'll hear more from them as we move on. Today we'll really be talking about how our grant-making organizations came to what is for us a slightly different approach to supporting childcare and childcare change-making. We'll spotlight the really important work that we have been able to support in Louisiana, which to us is the most exciting part. And we'll also share lessons learned and what you might want to consider if you want to do similar work. Before we jump into the content, I wanted to recognize a few people in the audience who are very important to the work. Albert Watt with the Alliance for Early Success is actually who helped us to be here today. And he helped to create the Child Care Next project, which I'll talk about. And Ashley Beckner with Imaginable Futures is an organization that funds both Child Care Next and Raising Child Care Fund. So thanks to you for being here. We also wanted to get a sense of who's in the audience. So raise your hand if you work in early childhood in some way. Nice, okay. Shout out for early childhood. There haven't been that many of us here this week. What about people who work in philanthropy? Nice. Any organizers? Okay, you'll have to represent for us. And then who's here just because they thought we were cool because we had a hashtag in our title? Because that's pretty cool. Yeah, see? Okay. And then finally, how many people in this room have had challenges and had to change work schedules because of childcare challenges? Yes, yesterday. So this is a very real problem that we're trying to make change in, both at the state level and nationally. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Rachel, to talk about what grant makings traditionally look like in the early childhood space and how Raising Child Care Fund is doing things differently.
Great, thank you. So good to see a mix of folks here. So I'm going to tell you a story. One thing I've learned, so I'm a policy wonk, okay? I spent my whole life doing policy. Nobody tells you in policy school, maybe you should start by going and asking the folks who you're trying to help what they want, right? No one tells you that. So I spent my whole life doing that work. So I have learned from working with grassroots organizers the power of stories and really starting with the personal in terms of realizing your power. So here's a story. Let's go back to 2017 when a lot of us were doing a lot of reflecting around how we got into a space where we had a lot of, we were really worried about where the nation was going. I had just left the Obama administration where I had been working on a childcare regulation where we had sort of assumed the next step was going to be a president coming in and putting a heck of a lot of money in childcare. And that wasn't looking like it was going to happen. So I was working in a foundation and part of the Early Childhood Funder Collaborative, and a lot of us were talking about what should we do? How can we get involved to try to continue the momentum that had been going on around childcare? And how do we get in this space where we just passed legislation at the national level, but there wasn't money behind it? And the question was, we didn't build the power. We didn't pass the right thing, and we really needed to not do that again. So the ECFC at the time had over 30 foundation members, and we did some work to understand who was in the space, like what were they funding? Almost everyone funded childcare, but hardly anyone funded organizing. Grassroots organizing with parent or provider-led groups, really resourcing the people closest to the problem to be part of the solution. And we started to do some talking to, some of the foundations started to do some talking to groups like Community Change, Family Values at Work, national organizations that were really doing organizing and supporting organizers around the country. And they were telling us people want to work on childcare. There's no money out there to support this kind of organizing. It's the most needed thing that you could do right now if you really want to add value in this space. And so we also learned that those groups were groups we'd never heard of. Not only were they not known to the funder community, they weren't known to often white-led professional advocacy groups in those states who we know and love, who had been slogging around trying to make childcare progress for years, but they weren't working together. So we decided to do an experiment, and we formed the Raising Childcare Fund, and basically with the idea of, let's see what happens. Who needs this? Like, will people want to apply for this? We had 3 times the applications than with the money we had raised. And since then, this is our mission. We are, really focused on lifting voices of those closest to the problem, building power, and expanding equity. And our journey is that we've been able to raise over $11 million since we started, and we've directed over 90% of it to groups like the group that Ashley leads to really help their capacity so they can really focus on the childcare issue. And we have learned from working with them, they are vastly underfunded. So if you can go, we have 17 state partners. I include DC as a state because we should be a state. We do not have a senator. We have no congressional representation. If we just were a state, we would have a lot less problem in the Senate. But anyway, going on. We learned that these groups often had a lot less money, and we needed to do a lot of funder-facing work to actually make this change happen. So you can see there's our goals on the left, and in the middle, we do funder education, we do we have matching funders in states, and we really try to, we think of ourselves as an equity lab. And so along came COVID, right? So our long-term goal is that all these groups no longer have to fight for the money that we're having to do a national pool to get them the resources they need. It's really hard to convince philanthropy to fund organizing. A lot of misunderstood issues around lobbying and whether their money can be used for it. We're really trying to educate people on that. So if you go to the next slide, we have to do things differently in order to do this right. So we are learning from our partners all the time and really trying to take our cues from them. It's caused us to slow down, lift burden on our, in terms of reporting and things like that, that are often just gonna go in a file, and they really take time from the organizing work that folks need to do. And we've really tried to be more of a partner and implement trust-based philanthropic principles so that we're putting them in the driver's seat. And our job is to raise money, and we do not, it's general operating, it's multi-year, it's stable, and that's we got to get out of the way. So that's what we do.
Thank you, Rachel. And as someone who has worked both in organizing and in a public policy organization, it's new for people to think about how do you measure when you're changing hearts and minds, when you're building power, as opposed to passing a bill or getting lots of money allocated to an issue. Quickly about the Alliance for Early Success, we've been working for about 20 years as a pass-through organization. So we give grants to those traditional policy advocacy organizations, now in all 50 states plus DC. And our idea is that we not only share resources, but technical assistance and a network of experts. We think of it as our special sauce, that we can help accelerate the work, not just by giving money, but also the other supports and interactions that we have with folks. Those grants have been traditionally to those grass tops organizations that we've identified through landscaping as the folks most likely to make change in the issues we care about, which are issues impacting children 0 to 8 and their families. A few years ago, we started to think about the work a little differently and realized that advocates, policy experts, are one piece of a bigger puzzle. And when you look at this, the purple arrows, we call it, the collective power, we were just focused on one of those arrows. Along with Elliot Haspel, who had the idea behind Child Care Next, realized that continuing to give only to those grass tops organizations wasn't going to make the transformational change that needs to happen to really solve the childcare conundrum that's facing this country. So we launched Child Care Next, which was a competitive grant proposal. We hadn't done that in the past, and intended not to fund an organization, but a coalition of organizations that would include grassroots organizers, parents, providers, the policy experts, all working together, not to make year-to-year incremental change, but to create transformational change over time. That means that similar to Raising Child Care Fund, these are significant grants for our organization in particular, much larger than we've given in the past, and they're multi-year. We know that this kind of change takes time. You have to build relationships, and you can't make the change that needs to happen in 1, 2, even 3 years. Our advisory committee helped to set up a set of core principles to drive the work. And these are really what we try to keep both ourselves and the state grantees accountable to. They're about building political power, right? We can't make significant change and sustain that change without that political power. That means implementation becomes a huge priority of these coalitions. Too many of the parents and providers have seen great policies passed at the state or national level and never had those roll down to their level where they're actually able to get access to a better subsidy or some of the other policy changes you see. This is about changing systems, not just putting more money into the existing system, but changing the way that the state and folks like you and I think about childcare. Many of our states see childcare needing to be a public good, right? That's something that is available to folks just the way that K-12 education is funded and available in our country. Our value is to include the people most impacted by childcare, and so all of the coalitions that we're supporting have parents and providers of all types, family, friend, and neighbor, home-based childcare providers, center-based, for-profit, nonprofit, involved in the work. And racial equity is central. What we know is that childcare the system we have now has been built on the backs of Black and brown women who have been asked to have very low wages to use their heart, right? They care about children, so they're gonna do this for whatever they're paid because they care about children, rather than because they're providing an essential service to our economy, to our families, to our children, educating them from 0 on up. We didn't talk about the brain science. There's lots of early childhood people here, so you know, right? So much significant learning happens between 0 and 5. And we need to be compensating the folks who take care of kiddos that are young as well better. We need to compensate teachers better, and we need to compensate early childhood educators better. So Childcare Next works in 6 states, and 5 of those are states that Raising Child Care Fund also funds in. So in Louisiana, for example, the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children leads the Go Far Louisiana Coalition in partnership with Wilcox Academies, and Power Equity Coalition is also at the table and receiving funding from Raising Child Care Fund. And that's similar in many of the states across the country. The coalitions look different, right, because each state is different, and they've identified different transformational visions because each state has a different political context. I think that's enough right for now about fundraising and funders and grants. So I'll turn it over to Livy and Ashley to talk a little bit about their story. And you all have seen some incredible investments in early childhood. And Louisiana is kind of considered a conservative state. Can you share more about how you made this a reality?
It's not kinda, it is. It's probably redder than red, I would think. Ashley and I met now almost 5 years ago. And you have to know that because we met over coffee when I wasn't in this position. And we walked away from that coffee saying, we're going to work together. And I ended up in this position at the Policy Institute. And within just a few months, the Alliance wanted to really fund some grassroots work. And so we were like, what are we going to do? And my first thing was Ashley Shelton. We're going to work with Ashley Shelton. And so this partnership has, I think, changed the trajectory for children in our state. We're very much a grass tops organization at the Policy Institute for Children. We know who we are. And the opportunity to work with Ashley and her team at the Power Coalition has allowed us to be more proximal to the people that are dealing with the issues on day-to-day basis of struggling for access to childcare, how to afford it, and all of those things. And when you listen to people, and I think we all try to, but when you listen to people in their community, as Ashley often says, they tell you what they need, and they tell you how they need it. And I think that that's changed our policy making in a positive way. What would you add?
And I think too that it's, again, it's the people directly, like the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And, as a civic engagement table, like our focus is bringing organizing groups together with a base to actually move around the things that they care about. And I think that, for Power Coalition, like we've been working on criminal justice, juvenile justice, housing. And what we know about all of these things is that there's so much power in the intersections. And so one of the places that we hadn't really built our organizing legs was in early childhood education, and it also too was just such an aha moment. Like parents, we also specifically women, from the perspective of like all of our work is really driven by this idea that women are catalysts in their homes. They're catalysts in their communities. Like everywhere they are fixing things. And so like this idea of working with parents, working with moms, and then certainly working with, childcare educators to really think about like this, we can fix this, right? Like we can, one, make sure that there's access. And then in addition to more access, we can also make sure that the people that spend the most time with our children and are forming their minds and are, and are loving them and showing them care also can make a living wage and take care of their own families. And so this has been a really powerful journey to being able to we started with the millage, which is a tax, because in Louisiana you can't say tax. Okay, so everybody's like, what's a millage? I was like, it's a code word for tax. And then ended with, the single largest investment in our children.
Down payment of an investment.
Yes, the down payment of an investment, but in the history of our state. So like,
We got over $100 million last legislative session for the young children in our state. Not just childcare, that was $84 million, but an additional $27 million for early childhood supports and services. So for those families that are most at risk to end up in a system, and a very fragmented system, that they would actually have supports to wrap around them, like it is historic. And like we're just two of of the coalition and the organizations that were a part of that movement. But I've got to go back to 2019. So our governor was up for reelection. I want to make no mistake. He got reelected because of what Ashley and the Power Coalition did. But the very cool thing is during that election cycle, he started referring to early childhood or childcare as just pre-K. We had so many pivot points to get to him within like 10 minutes that he stopped using pre-K. Because pre-K in our state is just 4-year-olds. And so we were like really working hard to push infants and toddlers. So much so because of power building and base building and coalition building that there was a statewide debate with the gubernatorial candidates. And all 3 of them spent 5 minutes talking about the importance of early care and education. And they used our data. And so that set our governor up, I think. I mean, he was always really a supporter of early education, but it set him up to make the strategic investments. Even with COVID going on, he tried. And so when we think about 84 million this last legislative session, you know, that changes the trajectory of children's lives. It changes the trajectory of families' lives. This is the work that we're committed to doing, and we're committed to doing it together, making sure that the forefront of who's actually leading this work are parents and providers. So our steering committee that we're working on with Go Far Louisiana, which is no accident, the name. If you want to go fast, you go alone, and you're going to mess it up. But if you go far together, we can get something right. And so our coalition of Go Far with the steering committee is 35 members. 55%, now over 55%, are parents and providers. And they're quick to say, no, that's not what we want, because we've been able to build power in them. And they already had the power. They just needed to know that they could use their voice and that they were trusted. Because they really need to challenge the Libbies and the Ashleys and the agency people of the world. And they didn't think that they could. And that's been a game changer too.
Yeah, and I think, context too. I mean, like Power Coalition, I mean, we're a civic engagement table. We do a lot of GOTV work, but we center our GOTV work in the issues, right? And we, and so again, we do about 2 million touches a year. That's doors, phones, and text messages. And then that doesn't even include all the media, billboards, Facebook ads. And so we're constantly talking to and reaching as many people as we can, whether it's an election, whether it's a millage, whether it's like the Bessie board and their inability to figure out that we still need early learning standards. And so the ability to be able to organize. But I think the most strategic thing that we did was, within Go Far, was we started with listening sessions. And what we know about listening sessions is that nobody believes that change is possible, right? They're like, look, we live in Louisiana. These politicians do what they want. We're the second poorest state. We're on the top of every, bad list and the bottom of every good list. I mean, and it's true. It's true. And so, but when you do listening sessions and you go into communities across the state, we were able to touch over 300 people through these listening sessions. I mean, I think total it was like over 500 once we went through the ground truthing sessions. Yeah, and then 500 people took the survey in addition to the folks that we actually touched through the listening sessions and the ground truthing sessions. And so what was important about doing these two activities, the listening sessions were about what do you want, what do you need, and what's important. And then what we do with the listening sessions is take the low-hanging fruit first. Like, what can I change today? What can I change for you in the next 3 months? What can I change so that you can show people that change is possible and that there is power in just them coming together for this one listening session? We were able to fix something, but then also too, helping them also think about what's the next thing. And even after the listening sessions, we went back and did ground truthing, because also people think you listen and it's just an extractive process. And, after Katrina, God knows I went through a lot of extractive processes with a lot of folks that were supposed to help me and help the community. But the ground truthing was really about, this is what you told us, and here's what we think are some solutions. Well, no, you know the solution you want, but here's a pathway to those solutions. And through that process, right now, today, communities are like, we're ready. Like, what's the next step? What are we doing? Like, what's the, you know, like, how are we going to do this? And, oh, I'm going to call you and talk to you about this. And, oh, don't forget this is happening in our community. And so it just builds that connectivity, and it builds that trust that's necessary for people to come together and actually use their power to change circumstances in their community.
And it's so true, because people are now pushing on agencies. And the agencies are saying, okay, we've heard, I mean, and they've been part of the Go Far process, but it's permeating through state agencies to the point of we're having agency leads call us to say, we've heard about this Go Far plan, we wanna work together. And so for us, Go Far, early care and education is absolutely a part of it. But also what we fundamentally know is if we don't have healthy mamas, we don't have healthy babies, and if we don't have healthy babies, we can't educate them. And so Go Far really is early childhood systems work. And so when you listen to community, and we like going back into ground truthing and hear, you know, you got that right, but there's some nuance there you didn't get. And the beauty of the ground truthing. And so when we went into this process, originally we had like 4 pillars of work. And because we went to community, we ended up with 5 pillars of work. And the pathway to how do we think about it moving forward. You know, 3 years of funding is spectacular, but the commitment that this is going to stick with us is where it is game changing. And the piece with we're in community, we're compensating people for their time and their lived experience. Our steering committee is compensated for their time and their lived experience because they're so valuable that they should be. Like, that should be something that happens, and that's oftentimes not what happens. You're just expected to give of your time. You know, we've had conversations with some of our parents. Well, I'm just a parent. You're not just a parent. You are a meaning and a magic maker. You know, same thing with our educators and our teachers. You are brain architects. So like, how do we continue to build people up in who they are and their wonderment? And we have seen mamas in tears. We have seen providers in tears. We have all been in tears because this matters. Like, they're all our babies at the end of the day. They deserve our very best. And I do believe we're going to get there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I promise I'm gonna stop talking. But you know, like, it's the one thing also that's so powerful is that, you know, what people underestimate is the power of a shared frame, and what it means when you bring people together to work together, and that you create space for everyone to have space at the table. It puts an exponent on the work. And so in, you know, it's been a couple of years, but in a very short period of time, we've gotten the state to make one of the largest investments they've ever made in our children. You know, we have created, you know, 2,000 additional, 1,000 additional seats in the city of New Orleans, and secured the 1,000 that we already had. We have, you know, created space for maternal health. I mean, we've got the highest maternal mortality rate for Black women in the country. And so maternal, you know, health is huge. And we've been able to pass legislation where now every, you know, insurance has to pay for a doula or midwife if that is what you want, right? Like, it's your choice, but they can't tell you that you can't have them in the room, and your insurance has to pay for it. And then also too, in, you know, postpartum depression and other mood disorders following pregnancy. And so we're just trying to create a continuum where we're really taking care of folks. And I mean, and this stuff has happened in the last 2 years. I mean, and so it's been really powerful, the power of a shared frame and what happens when we can work together, and that there is, you know, respect across the table, right? Like, across the ways in which we all work together and what we're bringing to the table.
Thank you so much. The work there is so exciting, and we actually are getting the chance to go there and see it firsthand in May, so it'll be amazing. I wonder, Libby, you know, you shared how yours is a more traditional advocacy organization. Has your approach shifted overall as you've been working to build collective power with organizations like Power Coalition?
How can you not be changed? That's the first thing. So yes, it's been changed. So I'm a bulldozer by nature. Like, you get in my way, I'm just going to move through it. We're going to figure it out. Well, when you're building power and you're building coalition, and you really value what everybody brings to the table, it slows people like me down, and I should be slowed down. And so again, as a bulldozer, like, I just want to move. But there's beauty in the wait, and there's beauty in the pause. And we really stayed true to what we're building. And there have been times that funders have been like, you need to tell, I want to know the end. Like, what does the end look like? And I've had to say, I don't know, because we're building it in community. Luckily, our funders, like Alliance with Child Care Next, they're like, just, y'all go ahead and do. There have been other funders that have held me to the fire. And I said, I can't be disrespectful to the process, so I need you to be respectful to the process and wait. It's been a bone of contention here and there. But we've built community. There is nothing that will make me or our team compromise that community. And some days it's really hard. But I don't want to live in a world anymore that if I have two of my friends that are Black mamas, that if we all had children, they would be gone and I would live. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to live in a world where I have to worry about who's on what wait list and how something's being processed, because it's a difficult process. Like for childcare, no. I don't want to live in a world that it's harder to qualify for early intervention if you have a child birth to 3 than it is to qualify if you have a child with developmental disability 3 to 5. Like, there's some things we have to figure out, and that's going to take time, but we've got to listen. We have to. It's imperative to listen to community, listens to mamas and daddies and grandparents and caregivers and providers. Because our providers and our parents have lived in fear that if they speak up, they will lose their work or they will lose access to the very services that they need. And so, yes, it's changed how we work. We live in a political climate that there are certain words that we have to be careful of how we use. And so our friend Susan Nelson, who's like a rock star, she was like, we can't always use the word equity in our work. We have to be stealth about that. And so it's learning how to code switch and when to code switch, and then knowing that we have a community that we built that we don't have to put the pretense on. We can just talk how we need to talk and try to figure out the issues.
You mentioned a little bit how funders can tend to muck up the process when they make demands, and Rachel said she has some things to share about that. Would you like to?
You've said a lot of things that I've been like, yes, yes, yes. One of the things that you really emphasize is the going slow to go far. And that has been one of the more important lessons for the foundation community that we have learned, is the things that people were doing in philanthropy to satisfy their founders, their boards, the donors, about metrics and outcomes were actually making it harder for folks to aim for blue sky change in their advocacy and their organizing, because they felt like they had to come up with a win, within the term of the grant period. And we know from the work that Libby and Ashley are doing, but also from our partners around the country, which also includes Olay in New Mexico, which, if you are following some of the news around early childhood, they just won a constitutional amendment at the ballot with over 70% approval to tap a land grant to fund early childhood and also make early childhood education a constitutional right for children. Amazing, right?
That's awesome.
Amazing. Took them 12 years to get there. And along the way, they had to do some things really that a lot of funders are nervous about doing. They had to raise what's called C4 dollars so they could primary some conservative Democrats who were keeping this ballot initiative from ever getting out of the legislature so the people could vote on it. So a lot of lessons learned there, really having to think differently about, no one's going to come up with the perfect research slogan, communication strategy to really make these kind of changes in the end. You have to marry your data and your research and all the things that the Institute does with the power building on the ground so you can hold electeds accountable. Yeah. And that makes a lot of philanthropic folks uncomfortable. And we have to do a lot of education around, most of our giving is all C3. There's a ton of work grassroots organizers can do with parents and providers, early educators that have nothing to do with lobbying. It's not C4, but at a certain time, we need that too. And so there's, we have other partners in the philanthropic community who are willing to make those kind of donations when needed. But really, it's 12 years of C3, except for that one primarying they had to do to build that power.
I recently did a funders breakfast back in December in Louisiana, and one of the funders said, "Libby, what would you tell us in philanthropy?" And I said, honestly and respectfully, remember you're not programmatic. And you don't have to have the answers. That's why you fund us, to figure it out and to work with our partners. And I watched a couple of funders go, but we have to be bold, and we're dreaming big dreams for little people. We need you to bend with us.
Well, and I think too, from a funding perspective, I always, so my background's in philanthropy, funny enough, and I always, tell the story of how it was right after Katrina, we had the Bush Clinton Katrina funds, we had all these, so it's I had access to people with power, I had $50 million, and we're gonna save New Orleans. And, by around year 3, I was like, okay, maybe not, because what we then understood was that the $50 billion that was coming from the federal government that we couldn't actually get to the ground was, being sucked up into disaster capitalism. And and still to this day, that's exactly how federal funds come down, and it's exactly what happens, unfortunately. But we're working on it. But one of the things that I always tell folks is that Power Coalition exists because it was basically I had a beautiful car, leather interior, buttery soft, beautiful stereo system, but we had no engine. This car couldn't go anywhere. And we needed people. And so Power Coalition really was born out of this idea that I don't need a pretty car. I need a car that can move. I need a car that can go somewhere. And also too, and it's okay to put this engine in this pretty car, but understand what it means that the engine drives the car, not, not the other way, right? You can't drive this car without this engine. And so creating those connections so that folks understand. And I think that even for us, we have fun. We're C3. We also have a C4. But on the C3 side, I do have funders that allow us to do, federally allowed, amount of lobbying. I think it's 30% of your operating budget. You file an election H, and but here's the thing: there's so much that you can do, and so much education and information that has to happen before you ever say a bill number or ever talk to a legislator. That there's so much power in that, and so I do think that one of the things that's been really nice is to have a funder community that is really moving into a space that we aren't going to be able to change anything if we don't both invest in we invest in the policy and advocacy, and we have to also invest in the people at power of all of this.
And I think we really saw it with the New Orleans millage. It's $21 million annually for 20 years for birth to 3-year-olds. So if y'all heard the ground shake on April 30th, it was because we did this. But what we saw funders do is, because we will push the limits of C3 and stay within C3. And so Ashley did a ton of work on that side. We were used to be able to get communications plans out and those types of things. But funders knew that we would be bold and we would be courageous because our little people deserve that. And so when I think about that millage campaign, it was groundbreaking in so many ways, and it was incredibly well funded.
So we'd love to take questions from the audience if anyone has them. This microphone in the middle of the room is your opportunity to ask those. So while you're mulling those over, I'll ask this panel one additional question. to talk a little bit about the role that racial equity plays in your coalition work and in the funding efforts that prioritize support for the people closest to the problem.
I mean, I can start. I mean, I think, it's interesting because I think that we've gone through, like I've been doing this long enough and in fact, I think I'm actually a little frustrated about it right now. But it's like I've been doing this work for over 20 years, and what I understand is that like I did so much work to get to a place where equity wasn't a bad word, right? And like in Louisiana, we did some testing that after Katrina about like what people thought equity meant, and they thought that equity meant take something from me and give it to somebody that didn't earn it or work for it. And I was like, that doesn't. I was like, that is so offensive. I was like, that is not what equity means. And so what has been beautiful over the years is that we've been able to do the work so that equity isn't a bad word in New Orleans, which is the only blue spot in Louisiana, but or the strongest blue spot. But it is still a hard word for the rest of our state. But I think for Power Coalition, racial equity is about how are we centering, people who don't have a voice and who have traditionally been disenfranchised, and then how do we help them walk in that power? And so, whether it's early childhood education or housing or the intersection of those things, like we have had success in ensuring that I think that like we hold the line around, like I'm not gonna, we're not gonna code switch about Black people. We're helping Black people and other communities of color. Like we're not going, like there's no way to sugarcoat that the people that have been the most harmed and the most in need end up being communities of color. And so, I don't, so in the fight for this, both with our legislature and, in community, it's just like there's a hard line, where we are. But then here's what I love though, and so this is why me and Libby work great together. So Libby talks to legislators that I will never talk to, ever. I mean, she had a dinner the other, like a month ago, and some of them were there, and I was just like, do not put them at my table. I will literally move. Because they're terrible. But they care about, she's gotten them to care about early childhood education. They don't care about anything else. But she has gotten them to care about early childhood education. And so that's powerful, right? And then I can always bring the Black caucus and the rural caucus to play so that we can get stuff done and move it. But it is also true that, like it is both, right? She works with chambers of commerce, also not my favorite people. She works with a diversity of leaders that are just not my people, right? And then I work with community and, and it's like, and they're not their people either sometimes. And so helping those institutions become more accountable to disenfranchised communities, has been a really powerful, piece of this. And, and I'll tell you a quick story about the millage. So it's 2023 today. The millage happened last year. When we did the work canvassing the community had a lot to say about this millage. They were like, who's getting these seats? I mean, are they really available to real people in community? Like, do poor people really have access to these seats? Is the organization that's going to be handling and managing this process racial? Do they have a racial equity, core mission, like core to their mission? And so it has been really, and so. Fast forward a year, and we're knocking on doors for a special election for a House district, and they're like, you came around here last time. Whatever happened with that millage, right? Like whatever happened? And we can tell them what's happening, but then also there's a part of me that went back to the group that's actually implementing this, and I was like, hey, I'm not holding back. Like, what's the data? What's the information? We have to be able to tell the story of this work so the community continues to trust us, right? Like they continue to appreciate and trust the messages of that campaign. And so there's also this accountability that gets put into the work when you work with community that is so powerful that it also becomes about, like I tease the group. I always just tease them. I was like, I'm not going down for this. I was like, we're gonna either tell community what's going on, or or I'm gonna tell them what's going on. And so how are we creating real relationships? And that everything's not perfect. I mean, all we can do is try, right? Policy's not perfect. To the point you made earlier, enforcement ends up being one of the hardest things you can ever do. Like we pass all kinds of beautiful language, but then trying to actually get to enforcement is always, one of the hardest parts.
And for us, I mean, if you look at our Go Far steering committee, the majority of our committee doesn't look like me. And that's been really powerful because as we built power, and I think of Rochelle, who's not with us today, who started an organization called For Providers by Providers, so that providers have an advocacy voice. Y'all, it has been game changing. It has changed, and they've been set up for 2 years. And Rochelle will say, Libby brings me into rooms that I wouldn't be trusted, and I bring Libby into rooms that she wouldn't be trusted. And we're able to move. And that's been really, really powerful in this work. And then the other piece is, like, we hang our hat on at the Policy Institute for Children, data and research. Data doesn't lie. And so if you're talking, like, there are places I can't use the word equity. It would just diminish some of the work that we've done, but the data doesn't lie. Yeah. And there's this misconception that only people of color are accessing services. I'm like,
we're only 33% of the population. It's like, the math, do the math.
Do the freaking math. And so, like, using data and research and trusted partnerships, and we have gone just where we've changed the trajectory in childcare in the state of Louisiana is because we got the business community buy-in. So Ashley is absolutely true. I bring a different group together than she does, and sometimes, depending on who's the messenger, we swap up who's going to talk where. Because if we want the state chamber to get behind something that we all want, we know who the messengers need to be. And so we work in a lot of honesty to say, I'm not the right one to go to that group. I'm not the one to talk. I want to be there to listen. Is it okay for me to be there and listen? Like, being able to have those conversations has been really meaningful, but it's relationship, y'all. I mean, we know this. If you're early childhood, babies, that's all babies are about. It doesn't change when you get older, but you have to be able to know how to bridge them and walk it and walk the talk too. So, like, our State Chamber of Commerce for a while just said early childhood. They are now doing the action, because I said, I'm tired of the talking. And I'll tell that to a legislator too. Like, no talk, like, what are you gonna do? And so we're finally getting to the point that we're seeing the doing, and that's taken us years.
We'd love to hear your question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Hi, this is really tall today. So I'm Ariana. I'm with Austin PBS. I am our child care outreach specialist and project manager. I work in providing low-income sites with support and resources, but when I take my badge off, I'm also an advocate. My question is, and I do apologize, I got here a little late. The conference has worn me out, so I got up late this morning, and I do apologize. The work you guys are doing is amazing, especially in Louisiana and things like that. From what I heard, I may have missed it in the beginning. And I've heard of work that's going on in DC as well, where they have preschool for all as well, which is amazing. Are there plans on taking that data and really showing it to on a national level? Because I know we're doing our best here in Texas to fight that fight, and I'd love to hear more on how you got business buy-in, because we're actually planning on having a session at the end of this month, the African American Alliance here in Texas, where we want to have providers and business owners, because we can't do anything about policy, but we can at least get the business to buy in and invest in.
You can always do something about policy, always. I would say for the game changer for us, we were the first state in the country that we were able to demonstrate the economic impact of childcare breakdown in our state. And that was done in 2017. We updated it in 2021. So we're able to say with great confidence that childcare breakdowns cost our economy $1.3 billion a year. And I always say a B, not an M. And the $1.3 billion in Louisiana is a ton of money. And then it's costing our employers $762 million annually because they don't have a workforce that they can rely on. So we beat that in. And then we have business champions that say the number one issue I have right now is getting in my employees at work because they can't get childcare. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing that we did, and we launched this last year in 2022, was we can keep talking about this data piece, but what does it mean to an individual company? Like, what are they losing? So we developed a calculator for business. It's on our website at policyinstitutela.org that anybody can go onto and quantify what it cost. So like Entergy is the only Fortune 500 company we have in the state. They let us use their data. They're losing $14 million annually due to childcare breakdowns because and so that has changed how we are able to talk about it. And we're very strategic about coalition building. So we have a Ready Louisiana coalition that's just focused on investment. And it has the Entergys, it has the chambers, it has economic developers, it has those people. And having the right messengers. And I'll just be blunt. When a white man gets up and talks about it as an economic and a workforce issue, people pay attention. I want to talk about babies all day long. Nobody wants to hear me talk about babies all day long. But when we start talking about the economy and we get the right messengers, we've seen change.
Thank you.
Does anyone want to share anything else in response to that question? One thing I would add is that, like, in all 50 states, there are coalitions and policy folks working on this, and so getting into contact with them as well to see how you can augment and contribute to their work. There's also, the Alliance has a statewide or national network. The Region Child Care Fund has quite a few states, and then the Child Care for Every Family Network is also working. And their model really is especially taking those state level examples and trying to build them up to a national approach to how we can fix childcare. But we love to share, approaches and best practices and experiences. So definitely feel free to reach out and we can share more. Did you have anything else?
Oh, I wanted to get back and make sure that we talked about race equity in the philanthropic context because, we've never been afraid to say that childcare sits right at the nexus of racial, gender, and economic injustice. 98% of the workforce are female and disproportionately Black and brown women whose labor is being exploited. And we're not afraid to say that anymore. For a long time, people were not willing to say that. And whether you say it in the term of racial equity or not, it's just a fact that folks are, half the workforce could qualify for federal benefits because they make so little money. And we're really trying to be really upfront as well, like you said, just say it. These are Black and brown women whose labor is being exploited. So that I think is something philanthropy is wrestling with, trying to get more able to actually just say these things and say, so we should prioritize BIPOC-led groups. 75% of our groups have a BIPOC person in the leadership position. And we really encourage that sort of thought among our partners, all the folks in the Early Childhood Funder Collaborative. And the Raising Childcare Fund provides a sort of safe way for funders who are not so able to maybe directly fund a grassroots group like this through their own, there's reluctance. If they put the money through us, it gives them a little cover. Yeah. And we, after COVID hit, we quadrupled our money because so many people wanted to do something differently, fund differently. But I would say, it's harder to hold philanthropy accountable, but there's a tendency to slip back. So we are, we have to keep saying, just because the pandemic is over, all that incredible racial inequity, disparity, all the things we saw are still there. We didn't continue the child tax credit, which lifted half of children out of poverty. How is that possible?
Right, or get any ARPA dollars to the ground in any state.
Yeah, and so just one last word is that the intersectionality, yes, we have the word childcare in our title. All of our groups work on everything. Climate, K-12, gender, other, paid family leave, birth equity. It's really, when you're doing grassroots organizing, it's just like you're working with families. Families don't think about those, I need a group, I need this here, and I need that. It's like all of it. So that's how we fund.
Go for it.
I have two questions. One's really fast. You said the website policy, but then I was trying to write it down fast enough and I didn't get it.
My email's up there, so you can email me and I'll get
awesome.
you anything you need.
Okay, thank you. That was my first one. But my second one is when you've been talking a lot about funding, and you were mentioning earlier having funders like stay with me. Like I know this isn't. And I run an education nonprofit that's Austin-based, and we're running into something sort of similar where like we are not big enough to qualify for like federal or state grants right now, and so we're getting local funding, but they want something that they can like post or share immediately, like look how many books we put in schools or something, and we're doing long-term work. How do you target those specific funders?
So one thing to understand about us at the Policy Institute is we don't take any public dollars. So like we don't take any state funding, any federal funding. So predominantly it's philanthropy and donors. And so, and we're not programmatic. So, you know, we're not going to talk about a certain program in a certain child care center, that kind of thing. So, you know, we talk a lot about access, and then we talk about reach. So like who we're talking to, you know, like Ashley and I, when we do a grant report, this will be part of our grant report that we came here and we did that. You know, who we speak to, those types of things, that you can start to see where the movement is happening, and you can quantify it in media and talking engagements and those kinds of things. What else would you add?
Well, and I think too, like the beautiful thing about people is that you can count them, right? You know, and so, and also too, there's so much power in it and information in it. And so it's like, you know, you can have listening sessions, you can have, you know, panel discussions where you're bringing people together to, you know, to problem solve, right? Like you can, like there are all of these, you know, kind of things that you can do while they're, you know, like while you're waiting to do that, while you're doing this long-term work, like the things that happen in between that still inform the long-term work, that still move the long-term work. And so, you know, I think that that's definitely one of the things that has helped us in this, is that like folks want an immediate outcome. It's like, you know, well, I don't have an immediate outcome, but what I do know is that, again, if I put my work within a shared frame with other partners with, you know, with the same hard mission, if, you know, like, and if we work together, that there's an exponent. And then I think it's also, you know, thinking about what does it mean, you know, to create access to local elected officials? What are the questions you want to ask them? What are the, you know, like thinking about the ways that you bring people together. And if they want to count things, they can count those people all day long, in the sense that it's, you know, it's like we are doing work that has a long-term impact, and we're ensuring that community is continuously informing that process. And we do that through, you know, listening sessions. And then it also helps you create a continuum of care. Sometimes that you don't know like that, you know, it's like I've been in a meeting, I've been on a phone call with a meeting. It wasn't a meeting, but it was Zoom. And, you know, and it was like by the time we finished, I had connected so many dots that I didn't know I needed to know. And so now when I talk to people in Monroe, I have a whole list of supports that I can share with them. And so sometimes it's just about building community, like in the midst of waiting for your long-term outcomes, that building of community can be so powerful. And, you know, people like to count, you know, funders love to count things, they can count those.
And it keeps, I think it helps keep you from being so insular as an organization. And so I took over from a founder who, she is fantastic, but we were pretty insular. And then COVID shook everybody up. And one of the things that we did is a lot of informational sessions on how to connect providers to resources. And again, in that process, we learned so many things. Like we had so many quality child care centers that weren't operating in a business checking account. That was a hang up to how they could get PPP loans. So like those conversations, and because we were connecting people to resource and then finding out, well, they wanted that resource, but these were reasons why. So then we were able to connect them to another partner who could help them get things set up the correct way. So anytime we can be in community in multiple different ways just makes us a better organization.
So we're on our last 2 minutes, if you can believe it. So we're happy to talk a little bit more afterwards as well, of ideas for showing what you're doing in the meantime. But I would love to hear your last thoughts. What advice or guidance do you have for organizations or funders who want to do similar work?
Fund the grassroots. I mean, really be intentional both who you fund and how you fund them. I think that's the thing that we've learned the most, that really stopping to listen and build trust with our partners let that help guide our priorities, change processes and practices in terms of reporting. Do you really need that 5-page report? You're just going to stuff it in a file? I know. They don't have the time to write that. So things like that, I think, are really, really important in that power sharing and giving access, requiring power sharing in your grants, really trying to step up that power access and also opening your own links and social capital to your partners from the grassroots has also been really valuable.
And, and I would say, a quick little story. The Kellogg Foundation is one of our funders, amazing funder. But what they would do sometimes was like fund one group to like do a toolkit, and then and they give them $1 million and then give me $100,000 to like share it with the community. And I was like, that's not how that works. Like the hard work's on this side. I was like, I can create the toolkit and do the work of teaching community how to interact with that toolkit. And so I think too, for us, it's been about talking to philanthropy about how we right size the investments. How do we make investments in people power? And that also too, that like we're in a moment in this country where, people power is more understood than it's ever been, right? And I think all the folks that used to love to tell me like, I'm not political, I don't talk politics. And I was just like, COVID proved that you need to learn some politics and talk some politics because, and I think even as a C3 organization, it's like I tell folks, and going back to, Libby's point about data, I was just like, I can't be political, but I for sure have an amazing political analysis and like where and how we can build power. And I think that also too, that analysis, and we're doing it right now for the 20, we have statewide elections this year. So we're looking at 2019, which was the last statewide elections, so that you can show people how many races were won by 3 votes. How many races were won by less than 200 votes. And so you make it real to community how change can happen. And that, again, like they may have came to me through early childhood education, but they know that their mayor's up for re-election and they're like, so what's the plan? And they're ready to get engaged and make sure that their issues are centered in those conversations. So when we have, candidate forums, candidate surveys, all of those things, like there are so many partners out there too, that I also just encourage folks to reach out to and just to create space. I think it's been so powerful. I'm on a listserv. I think it's Early Childhood Success. I think that's what it is. I didn't even know I needed to know all this stuff. They've got dashboards and I don't know. And I can't read it every day because it's like a ton of stuff that comes through. But I do think it's just helpful to have like access to other examples, other resources, other ideas that other communities have implemented. And so, also to look for those kinds of spaces where you can be with other people that are doing what you're trying to do, and connect those dots. And even if it is bringing your peers together first before you bring community together. There's so much power in that.
I would say, as Rochelle would say often, is dream big for little people. Like, don't let paperwork, policy, circumstances limit what the dream is for our little people in this country, and in particular in Louisiana. And I would say also come to the work with a great deal of humility and being willing to lay your power down so that somebody else can have what they automatically should have, no matter what.
Great way to end. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today.